Oh, that's a good view, isn't it? Let's switch that around. That's better. Sorry about that. Wrong name on the wrong cameras. So welcome to this afternoon's live stream. Today we're looking at getting started with Capture One. So it's a simple A to B workflow like an import-export. First of all, hello to those of you who are on YouTube and LinkedIn. If you want to ask a question, you're more than welcome to pop that in the comments and that will come straight through to me. If you're in our live streaming room, make sure if you want to ask a question, you do so in the Q&A tab, which you'll see on the right-hand side of your screen. That just means it keeps it clear of the chat. And Helen, who's helping me out also as well, will be able to see your questions much easier. So, back to Capture One. So as I said briefly in the introduction, the plan for today is to take you through like an A to B workflow. We won't be able to cover extensively every single element because it would simply take too long. And you would be overwhelmed with all that information and not really know where to start. So the point here is really to give you some pointers, get you up and running in a much faster way, and hopefully make you a little bit curious about the potential beyond what you'll see today. And we'll also give you some resources that you can look at so you know where to go to for additional information. So I hope that's all clear and makes sense. A couple of specific things we won't cover today is tethering, so that's connecting your camera and shooting tethered, Capture on Live, which is our live sharing product, and Capture on Mobile, which is on mobile phones and iPads, again purely because we would be all over the place and we wouldn't have the time, but we can pop in some resources for those things as well. All right, let's get started. So what we're going to do first is get some images into Capture One, into a fresh catalogue. Once we've done that, we can look at the interface. It's very difficult to describe Capture One and the functionality without having some images in there. So we do an import first in a couple of different ways. Look at the interface, do some basic edits, look at some cool stuff, export to final formats, and that should have us done. So I'm going to start straight from scratch and make a brand new catalog. If you're coming from Lightroom, it's exactly the same principle. So a catalog or a library in Lightroom is a central database that stores all the information about your images, knows where they are, knows the adjustments, metadata, keywords, and so on. In Capture One, we call that a catalog. So I'm going to make a brand new catalog. Sorry if that was a bit quick. File, new catalog up the top here, or Shift Command N. And I'm going to call that Livestream PM, like so. By default, that goes into your pictures folder. You can see here. If you want to change location, you can click on this button and store it elsewhere. Not super critical where you store it. As long as where you're storing it is a decent fast hard drive like an SSD, that should be fine. Doesn't matter if it's internal or external, no problem. So here's our brand new empty catalog. I'm just going to open up my mouse locator, which I, as usual, forgot to start. So brand new empty catalog. If I right click at the top here and look at what we created, you can see it's called Capture One Catalog. It's very small because we haven't done anything with it yet. There's no images in it, no adjustments, nothing. So very small, tiny catalog. Again, this is equivalent to the LR Cat if you're coming from Lightroom. Straight away, you'll see a very obvious, enormous button in the middle that says Import Images to prompt you, as that's really the first thing to do as Capture One is empty. Subsequent or future imports, you'll find the same functionality up here in the top left. So as I said in the intro, we are going to do a couple of different imports. So first, I'm going to import from a memory card. So let's put that in my reader, stick that in, and straight away it should come up like so. So this is showing me the contents of the memory card. Obviously, all I've done is dump a few images at my disposal on a memory card. I didn't go out and shoot in Japan, Copenhagen, Chicago, back home all in one hit. So just to show you exactly what the process would look like. Up here in the top left hand corner you can see import from, so that's where I'm getting my images from. In this case it was from the memory card. And then import to, what do we want to do with those images? So we've got a few options in here. Add to catalog. In this case we don't want to do that, because if you look at the help text it says your files will stay where they are. Now that wouldn't be super secure, keeping them on the memory card. We want to copy them to somewhere safe and useful. So I'm going to choose copy to folder, like so. So let's, in the pictures folder, I'm going to make a new folder and call this my photography, or my photographs for want of a better title, and create that and say set as import folder. So now that's where my images are going to go. Underneath we've got a few other options. We can change the naming convention if we wish. We can add some metadata. We can throw in some adjustments in the form of a preset. But as I said, today is about keeping it simple so you can experiment and play around with Capture One. So I'm going to tick this box down the bottom here which says pick all. So that will tick all of them to be ready for import. I'll show you in a subsequent import. Let's say you only want to pick a few. So let's say import all, and Capture One will start importing and copying those over to that location. Simple as that. You'll see a little progress bar here. Oh, it's over on my other monitor. I'm going to grab it before it finishes. Almost. So the activities menu here will just inform you of the import process. Now, importantly, you don't have to sit and watch for that to finish. You can start opening pictures, adjusting them, doing what you need to do. Do not wait for that progress bar to finish. It's a background task. We even wrote in here, you can close this window. Any activities will continue in the background because people were just sitting and watching. Absolutely no need for that. So that's our first import. If we briefly look at our library tab up here in the top corner, this is where you manage your collection of pictures. And you'll see here, if I expand out this section, you will see that I imported 18 pictures into the folder My Photographs, like so, as set in that import window. Now, let's go ahead and import something else. We do a couple of other imports and then we look at the interface. So this time, let's do something different. I'm going to hit the import button again. I'm going to choose a location and existing locations to import from. So let's say you already have a structure on your internal hard drive, external hard drive, wherever, doesn't matter, and you simply want to reflect that in Capture One, importing some existing images, then you can do so. So I've got my external hard drive here, which is an SSD drive. Let's go and find some shots. So I'm going to pick an existing folder of images. Let's go to Australia with Russell and select a folder of images. Let's take these, few shots in there, and say review for import. So if I do that, that will show me again the contents of this folder. Now, as they are already where I want them to be, I can just say add to catalog. Again, the help text says your files will stay where they are. So this means they're not going to be moved, copied, or anything else. They're going to stay exactly where they are. Capture One will know how to access them. Quick shortcut once more. I'm going to say pick all, so they're all ticked for import, and now say import, like so. This will happen a little bit faster because they're already existing on location. So all Capture One has just to look at them, generate a preview, which is what's happening here, and then job's done. So simple as that. And again, don't wait for that activity bar to finish. So what's happened now in the import tool, 1 minute. So now I can see, if I expand this out, we've got those original 18 photographs which we imported and copied to this location, and then we've got these 22 photographs that already exist on this hard drive. So your collections of images, they don't have to be in the same place. They can be spread over 1, 2, or 3 hard drives or whatever, not an issue at all. All right. Let's do a third and final import, then we talk about the interface and we check up on your questions. So I'm going to say import once more. Let's go back to this folder, sorry, choose it again. Let's stick with Russell and let's grab his earlier folder, 2022, review for import. Now in this case, let's say, I don't know, maybe you shoot events or sport or something like that. You've got 2,000 pictures on a memory card and you don't want to import all of them. You just want to import the good stuff. So let's go ahead and do that. So as I mentioned before, we've got our pick all button down here, like so. Or we can actually go ahead and just pick and choose. So if I just click on an image like that and hit the space bar, then it marks it with a tick. So all I'm doing, see, this is where this camera angle comes in useful, is click on an image, tap the space bar, and it checks it like so. So you can easily go through that. Now, as I said, if you're doing events or sports and you've got a lot of duplicate images, you might find the Enable Groups button handy. So if we turn this on, then what Capture One will do is examine all the pictures based on the content, just a quick bit of image analysis. It will drop them into groups. So you can see here, it's put these two wave pictures as a group of two. This one is one, this one is one. Put those together and so on. And you can tweak how similar they are or how not similar they are by adjusting this slider. So if I have the similarity very low, they're almost, in two different groups by the looks of it. If I crank this up, then it will start to be a little bit more discerning. So you can see we've got these two pictures down here like so, which have been grouped together, these 5 wave pictures because they're a bit similar and so on. So if we switch over to our viewer, then what you'll be presented with is the particular group we're selected, which is the middle one, and the contents of that group. Now if I use my up down arrow keys, I can switch between the different groups nice and quick like so, and each group will show me how many images are in there. So I've got these two similar wave pictures like so, and I can use my left and right key to move between them. You'll find if I zoom down to our fella in the sea again, right at the top, you'll actually get a view of the eye in this case. So we've got face focus settings. We can say limit to eye, limit to face if you want to look for expressions, or a certain zoom level like so. So that's really handy if there's a group of people at a wedding, sports event or something like that. So you can use that too. All right, I'm just going to come out of that and turn that off because I just wanted to import a few of these. So we grab that one, we grab this one. Don't need tons of these. Let's just grab a few so we've got something to look at in Capture One, like so. So we've ticked on a few pictures. We're going to add them to the catalog. They're going to stay where they are. So no copying, no nothing, and say import 8 images like so. Let's bring up Bdude because we're going to edit that one. Simple as that. I note your comment there, Kelly, from Malawi. Wow, nice. Long distance listener. You're very welcome. Just to finally finish off what we're talking about in this tool, in this top section called Catalog Collections, you can see at the 29th at 4:43, I imported 8. Slightly later 22, and slightly earlier than that 18. So this box here will show you your last 10 recent imports. It's just a shortcut so you can get to those recent ones. And then in the folders tool, this shows you the absolute finite location of where your pictures are, like so. So it's really as simple as that. It's not super complex, but I agree it looks a little bit intimidating with all this kind of new language and terminology and so on and so forth. Question from Rochelle. We have a quick question break. How difficult is it to move a catalog to a hard drive? It's super simple, literally. So you saw the catalog that I created here. You would pick it up and move it to a different location and open it. That's it. Close it first. So there it is, Livestream. Close this down. to make sure it's written what it needs to the catalog, pick it up and stick it somewhere else, and then you can just open it by dragging and dropping it into Capture One or saying File, Open. Simple as that. So no problem whatsoever. I saw a question which whizzed past, which was in the chat and not in the Q&A tab, which was regarding what's the difference between a catalogue and a session. So if you were keen-eyed, you might have seen something called a new session here as well. We won't cover that today, but just very briefly, it's a different way of managing your images. So you've got a catalogue, which is what you're used to if you've come from Lightroom. Similar principle, designed to handle a large volume of pictures with lots of ways to organize, filter, categorize, and so forth. A session is designed just for one project. So that could be a tethered shoot in the studio, it could be a location shot, but it's designed for that singular project. If you want to know more about sessions, again, in our live stream archive, you can go ahead and see all of that. So no problem whatsoever. All right, interface. So now we've got some stuff into Capture One. We can see exactly how it looks. And the easiest way to think about this is to think of the interface divided up into different sections, which you can move around and hide and show independently. So these are called, over on the left-hand side, we've got the tools and tool tabs. We've got the viewer in the center, which is obviously where we're looking at your image. And on the right-hand side, you've got the browser, which shows you the contents of the currently selected collection over here, like so. Up on the top, we have the toolbar. And in the middle, we have cursor tools, these little guys along here, which change the behavior of what the cursor does with different functionality. So these are the cursor tools. As I said, it helps to think of these as individual zones which you can hide and show independently and move them to different locations. So if we look at the view menu, and then you'll see each of those things that I called out by name. Let's take the browser, for example. You've got customize, and if you prefer to have that on the bottom, place below, now it's going to shift down here. If you prefer to have that back on the right, we can place that right, and so forth. Now all of these can be turned on and off just to change the appearance of Capture One. So if we go to Viewer and just deselect that, then the viewer hides, and then we've got a bigger area where we can just look at our images. If I double click one, then it opens back up into the viewer. Now most of us will do or action some kind of shortcut to make that a lot faster. So again, if we look at Viewer, next to the viewer, there's a little squiggle sign, which on my English keyboard is this one, top left key, known as the period. So I use that just to quickly hide and show the viewer. So it means I can very quickly navigate around, especially if you're in a larger collection of pictures. Let's say I'm working on this one and I want to go find another one, then I can easily hide this one and go up and open something else. Now by default that shortcut is G for grid, but most of us like to customize what we're doing shortcut wise. So you'll find that in edit keyboard shortcuts over here. So if we go into that, you can type in what you want to shortcut. So if I type in view, you can see we've got show hide viewer. I've got it set like this. You could change it to something else. And finally, you'll see, tools is Command T to show and hide, browser Command B, toolbar Option T. So you can very easily go ahead and just hide and show different elements as you wish. So browser, tools, and so on. F on the keyboard, full screen, got a little fly out tool there if you want it. Escape takes you back to normal. So do spend a bit of time customizing once you're a little bit more comfortable with Capture One. Same goes with over here with the tool tabs. If you never shoot tethered or don't intend to shoot tethered in Capture One, that's a whole waste of a tool tab there. So what we can do is right click and say remove tether tab, and it's gone, like so. Gives you a bit more space. If you would prefer to have these tabs in a different order, you'll notice if you hover over it, it says Command drag to reorder, or if you're on a PC, that could be Option, and then I can pop this over here. I can right click to add any tool in any tool tab. I can also create a complete tool tab of my own. And in terms of the order of the tools here, we can move them around, they can be floating, you can put them on a second screen and so forth. You'll notice that each tool tab has this scrollable zone if you've got a lot of tools in one place, and up the top we have the pinned area. You can move tools from pinned to unpinned simply by moving them above that black delimiter there. Or you can click here and say move tool to scrollable area on the little 3 dots, or move tool to pinned area. Just means it's really helpful to pin those tools that you kind of use regularly or want to keep an eye on, like the histogram, and for me, layers and masks, because I want those kind of visible in every tool. Nice. So yeah, spend a bit of time customizing, changing your keyboard shortcuts once you get a bit more comfortable. No two people use Capture One in the same way. We all have our different habits and preferences, so make it work for you, not the other way around. Okay, good question from Philip. And questions like this or actions like this, we addressed. Again, if you go back into the live stream archive, I can show you where that is later. We did a whole session just on managing your catalog. So yes, if you move pictures around, so if I dragged, a picture from here to there, then yes, links would be preserved, but do it within Capture One. So all those actions like moving pictures around, do it within Capture One, because then Capture One knows that you've done that. If you do it outside of Capture One, then the link is broken and you have to re-establish it, which isn't difficult. So, all right, let's move on to looking at some editing. Now, most of you should be familiar with the kind of terminology that we use in Capture One. So exposure, contrast, saturation, all that kind of stuff you're probably going to be aware of, but I think it's useful to know how some of this works under the hood. So let's take exposure as an example, because you're probably thinking, oh, I know what all of this does, but there's actually some really nice subtle differences in 3 of these sliders. Taking this image as an example, let's hide my browser, Command B. Looking at it, we can probably guess, okay, it's a little bit on the dark. I might like to brighten it up a little bit. So the obvious thing you do is think, okay, I'm going to increase exposure. Let's do that. Image gets brighter. Fantastic, I'm happy. Changing the exposure here is exactly equivalent to taking your camera, opening up the aperture, changing the shutter speed, everything gets brighter. So in Capture One, exposure is the closest thing to adjusting the exposure on the camera, but shadows get brighter, midtones get brighter, everything gets brighter, which might be okay. But in this particular image, we've got some lovely backlit smoke coming through, light through the trees. When I increase exposure, you can see what's happening at the end of the histogram. We're actually starting to lose detail here, which is a bit of a shame. Now we can go ahead to our high dynamic range tool and recover that without any issue whatsoever. However, you might find that using the brightness slider gives you a better option, because what brightness does is brighten, funnily enough, the midtones and the shadows, but it has some protection of the highlights. So if I pull up the brightness slider sort of slowly, like so, you can see this area has had much less treatment, and there's much less activity going on the right hand side of the histogram compared to our exposure slider. Now if I want to, I would probably still pull the highlights down a little bit, but it's, we've still got all the detail in there that we need. So brightness slider is incredibly useful. You won't find that in some other applications. I use it a great deal if I look at an image and decide, you know what, there's some good highlights in there I want to protect. I'm going to use the brightness slider as opposed to exposure. Just saves you a couple of steps sometimes. Incidentally, if you want to preview what a slider is doing, just long press on it and you can see before and after, like so. So that just gives you a quick look. If you want to reset it to 0, double tap anywhere on the bar and it goes back to 0. So I'll just open the brightness up a little bit again, like that, and I won't touch the exposure. Contrast, again, you might think, contrast, I'd never touch a contrast slider in an imaging application, which would have been the case 10 years ago or so. But this is actually a really nice blend of a couple of different methods of editing contrast. Yes, it puts in kind of an S-curve, but it's a mixture of an RGB curve and something called a Luma curve, which you'll find in the curves tool. We won't probably have time to talk about it today, but a Luma curve adjusts luminosity values only, and doesn't affect the color. So the contrast slider is a nice blend of the two, works really well on skin tones, doesn't send skin tones going off in horrible directions, so don't be afraid to use it. But obviously if we push it too much, it's going to get nasty, but we can use it in small increments, no problem. One thing I didn't do with a white balance, I wanted to warm it up a little bit, so there we go, that looks more realistic. So I'm happy with that. Let's just pop exposure away for a second and then talk briefly about high dynamic range, because again, there's a couple of different things that you might not appreciate here. Or you might wonder, what's the difference between highlights and shadows and whites and blacks? This image is actually a really good example of that. So if you look on the histogram, there's a tiny little, don't know if you can even see it. Let's make our histogram tool bigger. We can't widen it, I don't think. Oh, there we go. So you can see that little spike there. This is probably, yeah, it's just down here essentially where the sun is reflecting off this painted bit. So if I grab the white slider and pull this to the left, you can see it's killed that like so. So the white slider is the extreme highlights and blacks, so the endpoints. Whereas the highlight slider, we can look on another image, but kind of affects a broader range. So the whites is your extreme endpoints. And now if I reset, you see that little pimple comes back. Same for the blacks, the extreme shadows, whereas the shadow slider has a broader effect. All right, let's pop histogram back up there. So you can use these in combination, they don't have to be exclusive. Also, if you open up the shadows, you might find actually I prefer to have some deeper, contrast in my shadows, so I can actually pull the blacks in a secondary way like so. So all we've done with this image is just juggle with our exposure and high dynamic range and white balance, and that's it. And if we turn on our before and after, we've already come, a long way in terms of an edit. Y on your keyboard to turn that on and off, like so. Final thing that I just want to talk about on this image, and we get a little bit deeper into layers and masks. We can't cover the entirety of layers and masks because that would take us, an hour to talk about that, if not 2. I think the last time we did some live streams on layers, we split it up into 2 parts because it's a really powerful tool. There's tons of stuff you can do with it. But if you're looking at an image and thinking, I really wish I could target an area independently of everything else, that's when you start needing to think about layers. And the fastest way to do that, with the minimal amount of education required, is to use something called a style brush. And what a style brush is an accelerated way for Capture One to assist you in creating a layer, setting up a brush that works really nicely, and building in some adjustments for you all in one click. So let's take this example. We know inside his hood there's a face in there, but it's a little bit dark. So we might just want to open up the shadows here in this area, but nowhere else. So if I go into style brushes and expand out light and contrast, and I'm going to pick shadows recover. Now as soon as I click on that, you see my cursor tool has changed to the brush tool. So, and now my cursor has changed. It now looks like two circles. The inner circle is where the brush is the strongest, and the outer circle is where it's faded to 0, like a feathering. So if I want to make this bigger or smaller, I can just right click or control click, and this opens up the brush settings. Don't worry about what the other things mean, just focus on size for now. And if I start drawing up here, you'll see immediately Capture One sets up a layer, sets up a bunch of adjustments for that layer, and then I can open up those shadows. I could also do it down here if we want to see a bit more in the lid of the box, like so. So now if we zoom into his face and turn this layer on, or sorry, off and on rather, you can see the effect of that very quick style brush. So there's adjustments going on in this layer. I think it's just a curve, perhaps, or is it exposure? Oh no, shadow. So it's a shadow lift and a black lift, like so. So that single action of clicking that shadows recover button just means everything was set up for you. So it's a really fast way to do it. We could grab highlights recovered too. I could make my brush a bit bigger, and then if you were worried about the highlights here, we could dial a bit more back. That's created a second layer called highlights, like so. Now, if you've gone a bit too far, so let's just do some more brushing in here, like so. And if you think, you know what, I've killed the atmosphere a bit, don't forget you've got an opacity slider. So if we turn this down, that will show you without any brushing. And if I open it up, that's with the full effect. So if you want to moderate what you've done, you can pull around the opacity slider and it works great. So it's just a really speedy way to kind of get into layers. But if you're short on time or you're a bit nervous about it, that's just the fastest way to start mucking around. So you've got loads of options here. There's some enhancements in here, like adding some flare. So if I grab soft flare and make a massive brush like this, and then just paint in a couple of little stripes like that, then I can, you know, increase the flare I've got. Now I've overdone that a bit. So if I pull my opacity around, then I can get something nice and subtle like that. So super awesome, speedy way to get into layers. All right, quick break for questions. JD says, would contrast slider and curves counteract? Everything counteracts each other, really. I mean, all you're doing is changing the values of pixels in an image. So if you do one thing and you do something the opposite, it will counteract. But essentially, contrast slider is a blend of two curves. So if you increase the contrast slider and then did a curve in the opposite way, and negative S if you like, then yeah, it's going to counteract each other. Let's see, looking over here, let's see, someone asked, sorry I missed who it was, is how many catalogs we can have. As many as you want. In the same way that if you're using Word, you say File, New Document, and you start writing a Word document, you can say File, New Catalog, and away you go. We actually refer to this technically as the document. And instead of containing a bunch of letters and words, it contains images. But we refer to it as a document. So you can have as many of these documents as you wish. They don't live inside Capture One. It's an independent, sorry, get to the right bit. It's an independent file. You could have 5,000 of these. In the same way, you could have 5,000 Word documents. It's exactly the same principle. Let's see, there's quite a few questions going on there. Tony was saying, as a professional, I never use catalogs, only sessions. So yeah, some people only use sessions. Just there's lots of advantages to do that. Again, in our live stream archive, you can see that. And there's some more specific questions. Joel, hopefully your question was answered. What's the difference between shadows and brightness? We covered that, so hopefully that makes sense. Oh yeah, you can't see other people's questions. That's my bad. Let me turn that on 1 second. There we go. So those in our live streaming room, you should be able to see other questions as well. Is there a limit on the number of images in a catalog? Not really. I mean, you can optimize the speed by having decent fast hard drives, SSD being the best of course, whether it's external or internal, no consequence. The consequence really is the speed of communication between computer and hard drive. These days that's way more optimal than it was even 5 or 6 years ago with, you know, USB 2 and slow spinning hard drives or whatever. So really don't get too concerned about that. Dominic says, in my expertise, brightness works better than exposure. No, I wouldn't say that. It's just different tool for a different job, really. If you've got an image like this, which has, you know, a lot of highlights in it, then my preferred way would be to use the brightness tool. But if it was more linear, which we'll look at in the next image, then I would use exposure. One thing I forgot to tell you with regards to these guys, the cursor tools, is it's really helpful if you learn a couple of shortcuts. So I'm mostly sitting in this pan tool, which is H on the keyboard. So if I double click, it zooms to 100%. If I double click, it fits screens. So that's H on my keyboard. The other shortcut, if you can only remember two, is C, and that brings up the crop tool. So I would, you know, crop my image like so. You don't need to apply a cropping capture one. As soon as you start, you know, messing around with it, it's applied. To get out of the crop view like this, all you need to do is return to a different cursor tool. So I press H on my keyboard, and now I see the image as cropped. So C for crop tool, H for hand tool. If you can only remember those two shortcuts, those are really handy just for helping to move around Capture One. And of course, the all-important hide viewer and show viewer. Learn those three, that will help you move around much, much faster. All right, let's move to a different image and talk about something else. So let's go to our dude here, because this is an example where I would use exposure and I wouldn't use brightness. So first of all, I'm going to crop. So C for crop, and crop my image like so. A word about cropping and preferences. So I'm maybe a slight oddity in that I never crop to specific aspect ratios. I always crop how I think it looks nice. Whether that's good or bad, I don't really care, but that's how I do it. Now, the way Capture One becomes shipped in the default is not actually a method I like. So what will happen is when you choose your crop cursor tool, if you click on the down arrow next to it, you'll see various different aspect ratios. You can get to the same menu by right-clicking and seeing the menu here as well. So I like to do everything unconstrained. Now, Capture One will actually behave like this a little bit differently. Just ignore what I'm doing for a second and I'll come back and explain it. So what will happen is, by default, and 50% of you will like this and 50% of you won't, and we know that from analytics. So I'm in the 50% that doesn't like this. So what will happen is you'll find when you go to the crop tool, your aspect ratio will be fixed to original. So the same aspect ratio as the sensor in your camera. So then you'll think, actually, I don't want original. I would like to have unconstrained, or I don't know, 4:5. Let's change it to that. And then you'll go away happily and crop, happy days, go to your next image and then start cropping. And then what you'll notice is that it's gone back to original. Think, well, that's weird. I thought I chose 4:5. Never mind, I'll do that again. Start doing my cropping and away we go. And then go to another picture. Oh, it's back to original again. So that is the intended behavior as Capture One ships like that. Now I prefer to have a global aspect ratio because I do everything unconstrained. Okay? Or you might want to do everything 2:3, or you might want to do everything 4:5. So if that behavior I've just described annoys you, then go to use variant aspect ratio, and then you will find, let's go to unconstrained, that whatever image you go to and you start cropping, it will be on unconstrained. So just remember to change that to Yep, global aspect ratio. Sorry, I didn't change it. I thought, why hasn't it changed? So I have it set to global, which means as soon as I set it on unconstrained here, when I go to another image, just to verify, now you can see it's on unconstrained. So that's how I prefer to work. So if the shipped method or the default annoys you, just switch it in Capture One, Settings, Crop, use global aspect ratio. Excellent question from Keith. Is there a shortcut to change the orientation of the crop? Yes. Well, you don't have to change the orientation. Let's say you're cropping this to 3:1, just to give you a weird example. If you want it 1:3, squeeze the crop with your mouse or whatever you're using to point, and then you will get it 1:3. So that's all you have to do. You can also, in the keyboard shortcut editor, under custom shortcuts, set up crop aspect ratios. So if you're using like 4:3, 2:5, 6:1, whatever, regularly, and you want to have some shortcuts, just define what those shortcuts are, and then you can move through it much faster than right-clicking and picking the aspect ratio here. All right, sorry, bit of a digression in cropping, but I know that really bothered me when we made that change, and we subsequently put that preference in there as well. Okay, editing this picture. Step one, I would probably go ahead and crop. So I'm going to crop this like so. C for crop, H for the pan tool once more. Command B to hide my browser so I've got more space. And in this case, I wouldn't use the brightness tool because I don't really have any highlights. If you look at the histogram, there's zero information going on up here. So I want to make everything a little bit brighter because I don't want his wetsuit to be too dark. So I'm going to boost that up until I get to, you know, an acceptable brightness, probably something like that. And also warm it up a touch too, around there. Now this image is a really good talking point for the levels tool. So looking at this image, if we forget looking at our levels for a second, we probably think it's a bit flat, it's a bit dull. I wouldn't mind adding some contrast. So what you'll then be tempted to do is start dragging the contrast slider, you know, getting a bit more contrast in the image and so forth. But there's an easier and faster way to do that, which is to use the levels tool. So again, we can see here there's no information on the right hand side of the histogram. There's a little bit of, if we make this bigger, you can see we don't have any information there. The net result is that the image looks a bit on the flat side. So what we can do is hit Magic Wand, Auto, and Capture One will set the shadow and highlight points to either end of the histogram and map this value to the one at the top. Now that might sound a little bit confusing, but imagine you're just grabbing the ends of the histogram and you're stretching it out along the tonal range, which is exactly what we've done here. So if I reset this once more, this is our output histogram. So how it looks once you've finished all your editing. So if I start to push this in to the right, like so, then the histogram will update, essentially mapping those figures to the ones on the top. Easiest way to do that is say auto. Now the net result is that if we do a quick before and after, you can see we've now got a nice pump of contrast, good tonal range, no flatness, etc. If you remember earlier, I said this little long press on the tool would show you a before and after, like so. This tiny little icon here is a reset for the particular tool. So if I tap on that, that will reset the entire tool. If I auto again and hold down my Option key on the keyboard or Alt key, then I can get a temporary before after. So with no levels adjustment, with levels adjustment, much nicer. So on this particular shot, probably don't need to do a great deal more. Let's just put the levels tool back in. Where do I want that? Let's just put it there for now. Again, a little style brush example. If we zoom in on him, he's got a little bit of redness across the nose, not a huge amount. Actually, my white balance, I prefer it to be a bit cooler, but he's got a little bit of redness or coolness across his nose. So we can grab the red skin reduction, style brush, immediately the cursor tool changes to the brush. I can go onto the picture, I can make this obviously a bit smaller and then just brush over here and take out some of his understandable chilliness that he's had while sitting in the water. Now it doesn't look like a lot has happened, but if we turn this layer off, before and after, then you can see the change. If we want a bit of realism in there, I could back off the opacity. So I've taken some out, but it's not completely removed. All right, how are we doing for time? Oh gosh, I'm a bit slower than I was this morning. So I'd leave that image there. So let's move on to one final edit, which I can't remember what was I going to do. I was going to do this one just to mention a little bit more in depth about AI masking. Then we look at a cool batch operation, and then we'll very quickly just show you how to export to final formats, which is dead quick. So this shot here, let's throw in a style. They're preset styles, whatever you want to refer to it as. There are some built-in ones. I'm going to go for black and white. If you hover over the top of the picture, it shows you what the style does. So that's soft, that's punch. I'm going to go punchy. So one click, that will apply a bunch of different adjustments to Capture One. Again, I'll press C on my keyboard just to cut this down a little bit, or crop it down rather, something like that. Little tip, in the rotation and flip tool, there's also a magic one, which is auto rotate. So it doesn't require you having a horizon. Actually, sometimes that fools it a little bit. It'll work on a batch, so you can select 30 pictures and hit that, and it will go ahead and do a judgment on rotation. It's actually pretty successful. So faster than you manually rotating everything. So just try it. Select all, hit the magic wand in rotation and flip and see what happens. So if I reset this, personally I would have rotated that pretty much exactly the same amount to about there, so the characters are a bit more upright. Now the only thing I don't like about this preset, might make it ever so slightly brighter, is that the black is a little bit too heavy. There's some detail in there which we can't see. So we could try and use a style brush, but I'd have to be brushing with a bit more care because we've got some shadows going on here, which I kind of wouldn't want to affect. And then it might be obvious that I've done some local adjustments. And the thing is, with working with layers and masks, editing locally, the worst thing that can happen is for it to look obvious that you've done something. That's not what we're trying to achieve. It's got to look natural. So now what I'll do instead is use the power of AI, of course, the buzzword of the past couple of years, to automatically do some selections. There's a couple of different ways I can do this. So first I'm going to say subject. So Capture One will look at the image, decide what it thinks the subject is. We'll see what happens. Now to determine what that mask is, we can say display mask, like so. Or you can use M on your keyboard to turn that mask on and off. So that's what Capture One thinks the subject is. Pretty good guess. So I'm going to go to my shadow slider and just open up the shadows and see a bit more detail in that jacket. Now the only thing I don't like about this approach is that it's too much here on the right hand side. So if we turn that layer on and off, that's now too bright, doesn't look as good. So as an alternative, I'm going to make myself a new layer. I'm going to grab the AI select brush, and then what happens is I can hover over different areas of the image and I'll get a suggestion on what I want to mask. So I want to do this coat, so one click, M on my keyboard, that's the mask that I've got. If I wanted to add trousers too, I could do another click. And then I can open up the shadows here, like so. And I prefer how that looks to how that looks, because I've just opened up the detail a little bit there. That's all I needed to do. So the AI brush, you can just tap and select objects in the picture. Now it can be a little bit annoying. Let's just take this example. Let's say this pile of rocks or rubble in the front you wanted to select. If I grab my AI select brush, sometimes you have to wait for it to examine the image. So there we go. So now you'll see it would take a very long time for me to select all these individual bricks. So what I can do is click, drag, and draw around a selection like so, and then now I've got my mask. So if I press M on the keyboard, you'll see it. If there's any like little missing bits or whatever, then you can just go ahead and add them if you want to. So click to select, draw a box around it to select more stuff. Okay, so both works. Nice, let's go back to that picture because that's really all I wanted to show you on this one, just the availability of those presets which you can mess around with, and the ability to do some cool stuff with subject masking and AI selection. So again, if I make another layer, grab the select brush, hover onto the sky, and then I can pull the highlights down a bit just to make that a bit gloomier. Let's make another layer. If I select the wall in the front, so let's do that. So that gives me that selection. If it's messed up, like we've got a little error here, so I don't want that, go do the opposite. Get the AI eraser, and then I can just select bits that I don't want to be in the selection, like so. So super quick and easy to make that selection. Now I could brighten that up a tad, add a bit of clarity in there, which is a nice mid-tone correction, and we're done. Which is a lot faster than me trying to draw around that. Especially geometric subjects are a pain to mask, especially with a round brush, whereas doing it this way, it's really, really easy to make those, super fast, easy selections without any fuss whatsoever. All right, the next note I've got on my program is some cool shit, which is, of course, extremely specific, but we're going to talk about batch operations like so. Let's turn off AI masking now, pan tool again. So what about if you want to copy and apply adjustments from one image to another? Very simple to do. So we can copy everything from one thing to another, or we can copy single elements or a selection and so on. Now, most of you are probably going to do the following, which would be to dial in a bunch of adjustments to one. So let's brighten this up, warm it up a little bit, add some contrast and clarity, etc. So now we've done a bunch of adjustments. I would click on my copy button and then say apply, and that copies everything across like so. Reset tool up here, tap once, that will reset adjustments on everything. By the way, to get this multi-view up, if you're not seeing that, so if I select my first image and hold down my shift key and select the last, then Capture One will tile them all up in the viewer. If for some reason you only see the first one still, then you've turned this off. So this is our multi-view toggle. So if I turn it on, I see everything. If I turn it off, I only see the one with my thick white border. You'll see, even as I click through my selection holds, but the one I see in the viewer is different. If I turn this on, I always see everything in my selection in the viewer, but the primary, the one with that thicker frame around it, is what's known as the primary. So copy and apply, dead simple. I'll just do that once more. Copy and apply, sends everything across. Let's reset those. If you want to copy something specific, let's just grab the crop tool. So if I crop this image in a very specific way, if we find the crop tool itself, you'll see that most of the adjustment tools have this little up down arrow in the corner. This is a copy and apply for this particular tool. So if I click this and say apply, then it will send my crop to everything else. If I do that again, click and apply, crop gets sent elsewhere. Same would apply for exposure. So if I just do something silly with the exposure and click and apply, like so, then everything gets copied across. To make this faster, hold down your shift key and click the up and down arrow, and then it just suppresses that dialog and it's one click. But it's really nice for borrowing a quick, crop from one image, or a color balance or color grade or something like that. Super easy way to do it. Let's reset these. By the way, notice there's a little up down arrow next to the reset tool. You've got some other options here. So reset, accept composition. So let's say I'd screwed up all my adjustments, but my crop was pretty nice. I could say reset, accept. And then now everything resets except for my crop. And you've got the opposite here, which is reset crop and nothing else, or reset, which is everything. All right, let's show you the really cool shit as it was noticed, which was smart adjustments. Let's reset this tool so you know how it looks. Smart adjustment is brilliant if you shoot people, because this tool works on facial recognition. So if you shoot plants, animals, buildings, cars, whatever, this tool is less useful to you, but it's incredibly useful when you have single people, a collection of people, you're working with natural light. Concerts, it works particularly nicely at with stage lighting changing all the time, or a situation like this where we've got some images outdoors, we've got some indoors, and we've purposely, for this demo, messed up the exposure and white balance by a fair amount. So the way it works is that I first pick a target image. So we're just going to work on this one. So I'm going to make this a bit brighter and a little bit warmer. So this is the look that I'm going for. And in my Smart Adjustments tool, I'm going to say set this as a reference. So do that, and then I've got the white balance and exposure box ticked on. So if I have a bunch of images selected and I hit apply, Capture One will find the faces in each one and make them or balance them up to look the same as our reference. So say apply, a few seconds to do, and away we go. So now we've got a nice even exposure and tone across all those images, regardless of whether they were shot, you know, in indoors, outdoors, different location, and so on. Pretty nice, huh? Now, don't worry if there is more than one person, a group of people, different skin tones. It works surprisingly well in those situations where you wouldn't think it would. So don't be skeptical, just try it out and see how it works. Now this leads us on to another tool which you can work very nicely in a batch, which is something called Speed Edit. So if we bring in overhead cam, it's a little bit bright actually, isn't it? Overhead cam. Well, whoa, bit too much there. So it's sort of glaring bright skin tone. Let's look at Speed Edit. So Speed Edit is a really nice way to use your keyboard and mouse, whatever that may be, pointing device. I've got a Wacom tablet here, but this works with mouse, trackpad, doesn't matter. Okay? A dusty Wacom tablet actually. So what Speed Edit does is use your keyboard in conjunction. So if we look at Edit keyboard shortcuts, you'll see in the middle our category is Speed Edit keys. And what it does is use the top 3 rows of your keyboard, and number 1 and number 2, to be bound to some of the most common adjustments like exposure, contrast, brightness, highlight, shadows, and so on. So what happens is if I hold down Q on my keyboard and keep it held, you'll see exposure value pops up underneath each of these images. Now all I need to do is click and drag on one image, and that will adjust the exposure by the same amount, or the same delta change if we're being technical, across all those images. So it won't align them all to this value. It will give them the same increase if I drag right, just to be excessive, or drag left, like so. So if you felt, you know what, they're all a little bit on the cool side, so if I hold down 1 on my keyboard, you can see the Kelvin value, and note that Smart Adjustments didn't just copy paste the same Kelvin value, it varied per picture. So now if I want to warm them all up a bit, I can drag it just to the right, and that will add the same kind of additional value on top. Very interesting, certainly is. It's a really handy feature. Now what if we were looking at this selection of pictures and thought, you know what, they're pretty good, but the highlights here are bothering me, and I still want to use Speed Edit. So what we need to do is turn off a function, sounds funny, this one here, edit all selected variants. So right now with this ticked on, when I use speed edit, it will action on the entire selection. If I turn it off, it will only work on the primary. So now if I hold down A on my keyboard, you see now highlights has popped up, but it's only under this image. So now I can go to this one and pull those highlights down a bit. Now this one, I think I'd like that a bit warmer, so I just bump that up a bit like so. Oh, you can't quite see it because it's under the display, my overhead camera, but you get the idea. So with edit all selected on, when you use speed edit, it's going to happen to everything. With edit all selected variants off, it's only going to happen to the one that you are clicked on. Okay. I actually add this to my toolbar, edit selected. So if you right click and say customize, then you can find your edit all selected icon and drop it on the toolbar if you wish, or if you can remember the shortcut, you can do that. Because it's also really handy for things like color tagging and star rating, because now this is on, if I press 7 on my keyboard, which is my green tag, then it marks everything as green tag, which isn't super useful. 6 will clear it for me. If I turn this off, I can now make this a green tag, this one without affecting everything else. So edit selected means do the thing to all the pictures or just the primary. Very useful with speed edit. All right, last couple of questions, then we do a very quick export because I know we're sort of running out of time, but the export side is simple, and then we'll let you get on your way. All right, last couple of questions. So someone asked, what is it with auto adjust? Do I use it? Sometimes actually, you can actually turn this on in the import window. You'll see auto adjust. So if you have faith in auto adjustments, you can check on what you want auto adjust to do. So rotation is actually the one which I use the most, and remove dust, because there is a really nice dust removal one. So if you don't want it to do actually any, editing, then the rotation and remove dust is really nice, especially if you've got a load of dusty pictures. But let's just do rotation on this selection. So if I select all of these and go auto adjust like so, then Capture One will go through and auto rotate. It helps if you turn this on, and let's do that again. So auto adjust, and there you go, there's the rotation that it's applied like so. So I find that pretty useful, to be honest. If we look at this image, so that was before, and then if we reset composition, oh, wrong one, sorry, reset crop. And if we go here, we can reset rotation. So yeah, that's the one I find I use the most, because 80% of the time the rotation is spot on, and for the 20% I'll fix it, but it's faster than me, rotating every single image, especially with a volume of work. All right, last little thing. All right, so we edited some pictures, so let's put them in a user collection. So this one we didn't spend any time on because we could talk for a long time, but I'm going to make a simple album and just call this edited pictures. And I'm going to drag and drop our edited shots over to that. Now this doesn't move anything off the hard drive, it doesn't change their position, it's simply a virtual collection that exists inside Capture One. So it's a way of bringing, a number of images together from different locations into one place, but we're not moving them from their existing location on hard drive. Very important. Did I do that one? I can't remember. So yeah, so that's what we played around with today. What if we want to export those to final formats? Very simple, select all, make sure this is turned on, otherwise it will only do the primary, and say export up here in the top left. And this will open it up into the exporter. Top left, let's turn this off for a second. Top left, you've got a bunch of export recipes. There are some default ones there, but you can make your own with the plus button. All these do is describe how you want to export the image in terms of the format, the location, and a few other things. So there are some default ones here. So let's turn on I want to have an Instagram optimized JPEG, and I want to have a full-size TIFF as an example. So you'll see what happens. Why does the image zoom when I switch between these recipes? Because the viewer here is proofing what's going on with your export. So it will show you exactly how the image is going to look. So if I go to this one, we're on Instagram optimized. Technically that's too many pixels. So if I change this to 1080 pixels width, then you see it zooms out, because this is exactly 1080 pixels width. If we look at our TIFF, it's going to get substantially bigger because it's a full resolution export. So this means you can judge exactly how it looks. So what I need to do, I'm just going to delete that. That was something we did earlier. We'll talk about that in a second. First, I need to define a default location for all my export recipes. So if I choose pictures, let's make a new folder, all my exports, and choose that folder. Now this will be the folder, the default folder you see for every single recipe, every single export recipe. Doesn't mean to say you can't change that. We'd do that in a second. So my Instagram optimized is going to be scaled down to a width of 1080 pixels, and the TIFF is going to be full sized. Let's go ahead and export them, and Capture One will export them twice. So you'll get the export dialog up here. Let's just go ahead and open that folder while we wait. All my exports, you can see them going in. You won't be able to see it, but on my other monitor, as soon as that's done, a little notification pops up, and I can hit the show button, and Capture One will open up Finder or Windows Explorer for me. So now we can see our JPEG like so, and our TIFF. The JPEG is, as we promised, 1080 wide, and the TIFF is a lot more full size, like so. So that's one thing we can do. That is literally the tip of the iceberg with export. So let's select all and hit export once more. And this time we'll ask Capture One to do a bit of sorting for us. So you'll notice in the location, we've got a subfolder. So if I click this button, this shows me these little buttons, which are called tokens, which allow me to set up some automated rules. So I want to say, put the image in a subfolder, which is the same as the recipe name, like so. And I'll do it for this one, put it in a subfolder, which is the same as the recipe name, like so. So now when I run this export, and we go back to Finder, you can see it's made a folder called JPEG, Instagram, and TIFF, and now the pictures are going in there like so. There's a bunch more you can do in there. We can have more than one of these tokens. If we put a / in between them, it will make another level. We can string those together. Tons of stuff you can do, which we obviously don't have time for today. Also with the export recipes, if you want to define a different location for an individual export recipe, you can do so. So if you want a recipe to go to your cloud storage, Google Drive, Dropbox, or whatever, then yes, you can do that while simultaneously saving images to an external drive, to an internal drive, whatever. So the sky's the limit in that respect. So just explore what you can do with those. If we turn on the Show All Options button, we get some additional stuff. One of these is really useful, which is the Adjustments tool, which allows you to dial in a bit of extra output sharpening, as an example, or disable all the sharpening. Certainly for reducing the size of an image, there's a negative impact to its sharpness. So it's good if we compensate for that by adding some output sharpening. Equally, let's say you're going to retouch and you're outputting the full-size TIFF or PSD files, you can then say disable all the sharpening if your retoucher has said don't you dare sharpen any of your files. So there's a couple of other additional tools when you turn Show All Options on. So have a little look around that. All right, last thing to talk about is this page. So this is where you'll find all the live streams. You can use that bit.ly link or scan that QR code. If you hit the follow button when you're logged into your Capture One account, you'll get a notification when we add new stuff. There are a couple more live streams coming up in March, which we'll add in the next 3 to 4 days, hopefully before the weekend, if not on Monday, something like that. That's also easy to find. You can just go to support.captureone.com and you'll find written articles, tutorials, live streams, you name it. If you are in Capture One itself, you might have noticed you can kind of learn your way around it. So if you hover over the various different cursor tools or menus, you'll get a little tip where you can go ahead and watch some tutorials. If you hit the My Capture One button, it's spinning because it's got to load up from the internet, but you've got a shortcut to your account. You've got a shortcut to video tutorials. You can refer a friend and save a bit of cash. And there's also some walkthroughs as well. So there's a little style brush walkthrough, a skin tone walkthrough, tethering, how to mess around in the interface, and some basic editing. So you can try, you know, some interactive tutorials there as well. Last couple of questions. Can we use user collections with sessions? No. Well, yes and no. You can do two basic things. You can use an album and a smart album. There's a couple of other additional things here called projects and group, which allow you to do, you know, a few cleverer things, especially when you've got larger collections of pictures. But you can use an album and a smart album in a session. Mishka says, I didn't know about speed edit keys. Cool, yeah, they've been there for about 4 years now or something like that. But it's hard to discover unless, of course, you know about it. But it is a really great handy feature. And if you kind of dial those shortcut keys into your brain, you can move around the application really, really quickly with speed edit, which is great. Rosemary, yes, this has been recorded, so don't worry if you missed anything. It's actually going straight to YouTube. So if you go to our YouTube channel, Capture One, you'll find it there kind of almost immediately. But if you're busy, I will send out an email tomorrow probably, which will point you in the right direction as well. So if you're busy, just wait for that email and then you'll know where to find it. Jean says, any news for Sony tethering? Sony tethering's been around for about 3 or 4 years now, I think. So hopefully that's the news that you've been looking for. We added Sony quite some time ago. We just added the A9 Mark III, if you're lucky enough to have one of those. That's fully supported. Any Fuji X100 owners out there who got to the top of the queue, that's also supported as well. So yeah, we've got day one support for cameras like that. Let's see. Oh, they're black and white clip indicators. Not black and white, but there is exposure warnings like so. So we can see those. To be honest, I rarely use it. I just have a little look at the histogram. So looking at this histogram, I can see, okay, I could be in the danger zone because everything's squished up to the left. So if I turn my exposure warning on, yes, I could probably do with pulling those highlights back, you know, a little bit. Oh, wrong layer, David. Pulling those highlights back a little bit like so. But I don't get overly obsessive about looking at exposure warnings because sometimes they can be misleading, especially if you have a specular highlight or something. Just keep an eye on this. This is your, you know, best friend in terms of knowing what's going on in the image without actually looking at the image. But yes, there are exposure warnings up here. How do you achieve accurate white balance instead of auto? I mean, the only way to achieve accurate white balance is to put a grey card in the shot, capture it, and use the white balance picker here. Let's say he was holding up a grey card, we could click on that. But practically, all of us don't tend to carry grey cards around everywhere, and you probably wouldn't want your expensive grey cards sloshing around in the sea. So I would also not get too obsessed with the accurate white balance. There's a difference between what's accurate and what looks good. So yeah, think about that. Don't get too obsessed with it. Scott, you must have missed this one earlier. Is there a keyboard shortcut to change the orientation? And secondly, shortcuts would be helpful. Where you've got both of those, first of all, you don't need to change the orientation. So let's say we're on a, I don't know, a 4x5, and you wanted 5x4, squish the crop. So all I've done is just move my pointer to the right hand side, and that now changes it like so. So you can do that. But if you wanted to do something slightly differently with the shortcut, then you can say edit keyboard shortcuts, look at custom shortcuts, and you can set a crop aspect ratio as a shortcut. So if you wanted a 4x5, or I've already set that as Shift Command 0. So if I just mess this up for a second, what am I actually on? Am I on 4x5? Let's go to 1x3. So if I do my Option Command 0, I've now changed to 4x5. Scott, there's nothing to stop you setting up 4x5 and 5x4 and having a shortcut for each of those. So all I would first do is right click, add my custom aspect ratio. So you want a 5x4 as an example, put that as 5x4. So now in your drop down list, you've got a 5x4 and a 4x5. And then in your keyboard shortcuts, edit keyboard shortcuts, you can add a crop aspect ratio, and then you would pick your 5x4 and then put your whatever, your shortcut key in for that. So now I can go 4x5 and 5x4 just with my shortcut key. Nice. So yeah, you can do it exactly like that if you wish. Fabulous. All right, all questions answered as far as I can see. Everything is good. So thanks for joining me today. As I said, we couldn't cover, every single aspect of Capture One. We'd be here for about 2 days pretty much if you wanted to do that, which isn't really feasible in a live environment. But hopefully it's piqued your curiosity. You kind of now know where you want to look to expand your knowledge. Use our support site, support.captureone.com, as your knowledge base. And of course, if you want to reach out to support for technical questions, queries, technical help, then you can also do that as well. Live streams, back in March, and hopefully we'll get them up in the next few days or so, also on the support site. So thanks for joining me today. Have a great weekend when it comes, and see you soon. Bye now.